Hi children, now we are going to discussing chapter 14 Democratic and Nationalist Revolution 19th century. In previous chapter, that means 13th chapter, we discussed about democratic revolutions. Most of these were also nationalistic in character. Europe at that time was divided into small kingdoms and large empires. There were no feelings of the democratic and nationalistic. We are going to discussing about nationalism, region, European states, kingdoms of Europe, and liberal nationalism, a new conservation after 1815, the revolt of 1830 and 1848, and the unification of the Germany and Italy. In Europe, democratic and nationalistic movements sought to establish powerful states which were based on the active participation of the citizens who felt that they shared a common history, culture, and economic life. The French Revolution brought many changes in Europe, mainly political and constitutional changes. The French Revolution led to the transfer of sovereignty or power from the monarchy to French citizens. The revolutionaries declared that it was the destiny of the French nation to liberate the people from the despotism. That means king's rule or monarchy rule. The king is the final authority and the people have no right to ask any question. Nationalism was developed among the people in the European continent. What is nationalism? The nationalism is the spirit of love and pride for one's own country, and that country is better than other country. The French Revolution gave the modern meaning for nation. A nation is not a territory, it is a people. It inhabited themselves. France was not merely the territories. The territory means French people. That nation recognized no law or authority above its own. And if a nation is sovereign, that means the people consisting the nation are the sources of all powers and authority. There cannot be any rulers above the people. On a republic in which the government derives its authority from the people, that means government depending upon the people and is responsible to the public, that means people. It is interesting to remember that when Napoleon became an emperor, he called himself the emperor of the French Republic. Such was the strength of the idea of people's sovereignty. The entire nation was united. People and army supported to Napoleon. Here given small box, Jacobin clubs. Jacobin clubs for radical democracy thinkers. Under the Jacobin constitution, all people were given the right to vote and the right to of insurrection, that means right to revolt. The constitution stated that the government must provide the people with work or livelihood. The happiness of all was proclaimed as the aim of government. The government abolished slavery in the French colonies. Napoleon's rise to power was step backward. However, though he destroyed the republic and established an empire, but the idea of the republic could not be destroyed in the minds of French citizens. After the defeat of Napoleon, the old ruling dynasty of France was restored to power, mainly Charles X and Louis Philippe. Within a few years, there were two revolutions occurred in France in 1830-1848. In 1830, at the time of Charles X, in 1848, at the time of Louis Philippe. During their rule, the people disliked and revolt against them. In 1848, the monarchy was again overthrown. Finally, in 1871, the republic was again took place. The all revolutions came with the support and blood of common people, the city poor and the peasants. In 1972, for the first time in history, workers, peasants and poor people were given equal political rights. The right to vote and the elected representatives did not solve the problem of the common people. Peasants got their lands. Workers, artisans were the backbone of the revolutionary movements. The revolution did not bring real equality to them. Real equality could come only with the economic equalities. The France soon became one of the first countries where the idea of social equality of socialism gave rise to new kind of political movement. Now we are going to discussing about kingdoms of Europe. If you look at the map of mid 18th century Europe, you will find that there was no nation states, that means independent countries. But today, map of Europe entirely different. Almost all countries independent countries. Example Germany, Italy and Switzerland. In mid 18th century, there was no collective identity or common culture. They were spoke different languages and belonged to different ethnic groups. In Austria and Bohemia, Tyrol predominantly German speaking. In Lombardy and Venetia speaking Italian. In mid 18th century, there were aristocratic families, middle class, peasants played vital role. Socially and politically, aristocracy families dominated in the continent. The members of this class were united by a common way of life. They owned estates in the countryside, that means in rural areas, and also have a town houses. This spoke French for purpose of diplomacy and high in the society. Aristocratic families were often connected by tie of marriages. These powerful families numerically very small groups. The majority in the society belongs to the peasants. Central Europe, the pattern of land holdings was characterized by vast estates which were cultivated by the serfs. Serfs means who were bound to the land of a particular lord and could not migrate without the permission, like slaves. Industrialization began in England in the second half of the 18th century, but in Europe and other parts of the Germany states it occurred only during the 19th century. Meanwhile, new social groups came in to bring a working class population and middle class. The other were industrialists, businessmen, various kinds of professionals. In Central and Eastern Europe, these groups were smaller in number till then 19th century. Here given some of the important years are timeline. In 1797, Napoleon invades Italy. Napoleonic War begins. In 1814-1815, fall of Napoleon, the Vienna peace settlement. In 1821, the Greek struggle for independence begins. In 1859-1870, unification of the Italy. In 1866-1871, unification of Germany. The idea of the liberalism developed in the early 19th century in Europe. For the new middle classes, liberalism stood for the freedom for the individual and equal of all before the law. It was among the educated liberal middle classes that the idea of nation unity and the abolition of aristocratic privileges gained popularity. Liberalism had stood for the end of the autocracy and church authority. The Napoleonic Code went back to limited suffrage and reduced the women to the status of minor. Suffrage means the right to vote. Throughout the 19th and early 20th century, women and non-property men organized opposition movements demanding for equal political rights. The European powers, Britain, Russia, Prussia and Austria, who had collectively defeated Napoleon. After the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, European governments were driven by a spirit of conservatism. The conservatism believed and established monarchical and church authority. Conservative regimes set up in 1815 were autocratic. They curbed activities of revolutionists, mainly imposed censorship on newspapers, books, plays, and ideas of liberty and freedom. Now we are going to discussing about romanticism and national feelings in Europe. The development of nationalism did not come about only through wars and traditional expansion. The culture played an important role in creating the idea of the nation. Art and poetry, stories and music helped express and shape nationalist feelings. Romanticism is a cultural movement which sought to develop a particular form of nationalist feelings Romantic artists and poets generally criticize the glorification of the reason and science and focused instead on emotions, intuitions, and musical feelings. Now we are going to discussing about hunger, hardship, and popular revolts in France, mainly 1830 revolt and 1848 revolts. Great economic hardship occurred in Europe in 1830. The first half of the 19th century, enormously increasing unemployment and population. Population migrating from the rural area to cities and their lives in the overcrowded slums. The small producers in towns were often faced with stiff competition from cheap machine-made goods from England. In this region of Europe, where the aristocracy still enjoyed powers, peasants struggled under the burden of feudal dues and obligations. The rise of food prices or year of bad harvesting led to widespread in towns and cities. These were all occurred at the time of Charles X in 1830. People disliked and revolt against him. Finally, Charles X was forced to abdicate. That means step down from the throne. After Charles X, Louis Philippe became the King of France. He ruled 1830 to 1848. He called himself as a people's king. 1848 revolution occurred in his time. Louis Philippe was supposed to have a constitutional monarchy. In fact, he was called the citizens' king at the time of his coronation and the ceremony. He was covered by the grace of God. That means divine right. That means the king post given by the God. In his rule, food shortage and widespread unemployment brought the population of Paris out on the roads. His opponents were very numerous. The king's chief minister was unpopular and the king had to dismiss him. The people agitated in front of the dismissed king. The king's soldiers fired on the mob. In the firing, nearly 23 persons killed. The mobs grew so violent that Louis Philippe was decided to fled away to England. After the went of the Louis Philippe to England, a national assembly proclaimed as a republic, granted suffrage to all adults, that means right to vote, above 21 years, and guaranteed the right to work. National workshops to be provide employment were set up. After Louis Philippe, Louis Blanc came as a ruler. Now we are going to discussing about the women and the revolution of 1848. The large number of women had participated actively over the years. Women had formed their own political associations, founded newspapers, and taken part in political meetings and demonstrations. Despite this, they were denied suffrage rights, that means right to vote, during the elections of assembly. The Frankfurt Parliament, the convenes in the Church of St. Paul, women were admitted only as observators to stand in the visitors gallery. Now we are going to discussing about unification of the Germany and Italy. Before unification of the Germany was different fragmentations or different parts. Among the parts, Prussia was the powerful. Bismarck was the Prime Minister of Prussia. Under the Bismarck, Germany unification completed. These parts controlled by the other countries like Austria, Denmark, and France. Bismarck waged 3 wars about the unification against Austria, Denmark, and France. It took 7 years to defeat these countries for the unification of the Germany. That's why he was called Architect of Germany. In 1871, the Prussian King William I was proclaimed as a Germany Emperor. Now, unification of the Italy. Like Germany, Italy also had a large history of the political fragmentation. There were 4 persons completed unification of Italy: Giuseppe Mazzini, Cavour, Garibaldi, and Hector Emanuel II. Italy was divided into 7 states. Out of 7 states, only 1 state ruling by the Italian princes, that Hector Emanuel, remaining all controlling of other countries. For the unification of Italy, Giuseppe Mazzini had formed a secret society that was called Young Italy. The Prime Minister of Sardinia, Count Cavour, who led the movement to unify the Italy. Under the leadership of Garibaldi, Peasant joined a started movement, Unification of the Italy. For this purpose, he started a Red Shirts. Ultimately, in 1871, Victor Emmanuel II was the proclaimed King of United Italy. In the coming class, we are going to discuss in chapter 5th, Biosphere.